Welcome to EPG Pathshala. This is your module on selected poems of E.E.Cummings. I am Shurmila Mojumdar, Associate Professor, Department of English, University of Kalyani, West Bengal. E.E.Cummings was born on 14th October 1894 and died on 3rd September 1962. He was a representative poet of the 20th century. His poetry is marked by severe satire, irony, and parody. He is famous for his typographical experiments in verse. In 1911, Cummings went to Harvard and studied literature. He had his first poem published in 1912 in the Harvard Monthly. His early poetry was marked by the motto of arts for art's sake. His style took a radical turn after his meeting with Ezra Pound. He began using lowercase personal pronoun to indicate technical virtuosity, uniqueness of individual, and humility. The onset of the First World War shocked him, and Cummings emerged as a social critic. In the last stage of his life, he turned to transcendentalism. Before we proceed to individual poems, I would just like to remind you that Cummings was almost a contemporary of T.S. Eliot. And if you remember Eliot's run-up to the Westland, the First World War, it will be easy for you to relate Cummings' reaction to the devastation of the First World War and how it embittered him, and exactly almost in the same way T.S. Eliot also responded to the ravages of the First World War. And secondly, the important thing is his meeting with Ezra Pound. Again, if you remember your Westland, it is Pound who actually gave shape to the multitude of fragments that Eliot wrote. It was Pound who gave the poem a shape, and Pound should be Pound is an harbinger of modernity in American poetry, and the meeting with Ezra Pound actually inspired E.E.Cummings to embark on his modernist experimentation in poetry. 20th century was an age of chaos and turmoil ushered in by the onset of the First World War. It was an age where, in the words of W.B. Yeats, things fall apart, the center cannot hold. Hunger, injustice, bloodbath gripped the world, and the dignity of man as man received a death blow. Cummings took up the cudgel against social wrongs and wrote poetry to usher in a social change. Cummings pinned faith on the individuals who did not succumb to the rule of the jungle. So you see, highly idealistic stance that Cummings took at the beginning of his career. He was protesting against injustice, he was protesting against hunger, he was protesting against the violence of the war, and he pinned his hope on individuals who did not succumb to the lure of money or comfortable life, who actually responded to the call of their conscience. And his poetry, at least his early poetry, is replete with these voices of protest, and these voices of protest against hunger, bloodbath, and demand for social justice. But before we go into the texts of the poem, we will have to talk about the technical innovations that he made into his poetic style. This is unique, and in a way, it, at least for him, it reflects the spirit of modernist experimentation in poetry. Here are some of the innovations that he made into his poetic style. Among his experimentations, the most important is the use of the lowercase. This is something probably you have noticed on the title page of this module, that his name is also written with lowercase. Some of Cummings' poems make use of the pattern poetry where no adherence to rhyme or meter is maintained. He is notable for his new word coinages. He found traditional vocabulary ill-equipped for his poetic output. Cummings played with typographical rhetoric. He used space within single word. Now, if we go back to the period of when Harriet Monroe was publishing poetry, and she was encouraging new poets to write in her magazine, and they were making it new. What did she, or for that matter the poets who are writing to establish or a tradition, mean by making it new? As it becomes clear that they always felt the vocabulary, the poetic vocabulary that was made available to them was inadequate to express the newer sensibilities, and they were kind of trying to shock the reader into reading between the lines, to probe deep into their poetry, to find meanings into it, and that is why they made various kinds of technical innovations in their poetry. One of them being free verse, free flowing verse, where there is no traditional English meter, and there is no rhyme scheme. It read more like prose, but it has its own cadence, and that is how they were trying to make the difference. Cummings' various uses of parentheses are worth noticing. They are used sometimes for an interpolated comment or for the purpose of splitting words. Another technical innovation of Cummings' poetry is his emphasis on the role of the reader. For example, his poem Unjust invites the response of the reader to fill in the missing gaps. And here I am reminded of modern theatre, where the members of the audience is directly invited to participate in the action on the stage, and sometimes the barrier between the stage and the auditorium is completely obliterated. The characters from the stage, they come down onto the audience, and sometimes audience is invited to go up to the stage to participate in the theatrical action. Now look at these two examples of Cummings' experiment. Look at the shape first, because shape of a poem is not generally considered to be important, but that is exactly what Cummings is making it here. And if you remember your metaphysical poetry, you will remember that there are poems like The Temple which tries to imitate the shape of the temple, that is the subject matter of the poem. So look carefully at the first example. There are names of various publishers, and they are all established famous publishers, and the title of the poem is No Thanks To. So it's a kind of defiance, it's a kind of challenge that he threw to the established literary maybe tradition, at least the people who controlled literary publication in America at that point of time. Now we come to a poem called All in Green Went My Love Riding. The poem is culled from Tulips and Chimneys, published in 1923. This poem shows the pre-Raphaelite feature of Cummings' poetry. Now, do you know what pre-Raphaelite poetry is like, or for that matter, do you know who the pre-Raphaelites are? Rossettis, they are the most important figures in the pre-Raphaelite movement. Pre-Raphaelite movement in poetry is a phenomenon in the Victorian age, where the poets who participated in it believed in art for art's sake, by which it's meant that art is created for the sake of art. So you see, if you believe that art should have a social purpose, art can be propagandist, art can bring about social changes, art can be a medium of protest. They did not believe in any of these things. Their primary objective was to create art for the sake of art. And this particular poem of E.E.Cummings shows the pre-Raphaelite influence. The poem draws on the myth of Diana and Actaeon. This myth finds reference in the works of Euripides and Ovid. According to Euripides' version, the mortal Actaeon is torn asunder by his own dogs when he brags that he is a better hunter than Diana, virgin goddess of the hunt. And there is another version. According to Ovid's narration, Actaeon unexpectedly turns up at a pool where Diana is taking a bath and stares at her. Diana gets angry and turns him into a stag as a punishment for his act. Actaeon's dogs mistake him for a deer and tear him into pieces. Now you see, here is a man who has been talking about injustice, bloodbath, war, hunger, and now he has suddenly turned to a subject which is taken from classical mythology, and he is deviating from the style with which he was experimenting to go into the pre-Raphaelite mode. Cummings' reworking of the myth in All in Green Went My Love writing. Cummings interpreted the myth from his romantic sensibility. Diana is the speaker and Actaeon the hunter. From the outset, series of epithets to describe the quarry such as swift, sweet, lean, lithe, slick, slim suggest Diana's sympathy for the deer. Now look at the word clusters and look at the repetition of the same sound. That creates an effect which is very pleasurable on the on our auditory senses. So that is what is meant by arts for art's sake. And come to, and you know, these word clusters, not only they are very pleasant on our auditory senses, they also conveyed a sense of being sometimes being sweet, sometimes being smooth, sometimes being slim, because these descriptions are automatically, the sense that is contained in these descriptions are automatically transmitted to the reader. Then expressions such as cruel bugle, famished arrow, hounds crouched low reveal about her antipathy to the hunter Actaeon. So you see the dichotomy, he is sympathetic to the deer who was actually Actaeon, and she has antipathy towards Actaeon who was the hunter before he was turned into a stag. Four-tailed stags at a green mountain, the lucky hunter sang before shows, the pride of Actaeon that compelled Diana to change him into a deer. The death of Actaeon by his own dogs evokes sympathy in the heart of Diana that is shown by the phrase, "My heart fell dead before." We come to the next poem, Memorabilia. Memorabilia is collected from Cummings' 1926 volume IS 5. In this poem, we see Cummings' sharp satire and typographical tableau. Major characteristics of modernism such as realism, alienation, experimental syntax ring through the entire poem. The poem is a pungent critique of tourism, especially practiced by the shallow Americans. The title of the poem is reminiscent of Browning's poem of the same name. However, Cummings' poem does not share anything with Browning's poem except nostalgia. Now, the tourism is a direct fallout of American wealth, as they were becoming wealthier, they started going out on leisurely vacations, and there were people who acted as tour guides. There were proliferation of tourist companies, and all together they were completely changing the face of rural America and also the value system of the American people. That is, at least that is what Cummings felt. So he attacks the whole business, the whole tourist business very sharply in this poem. The opening line pokes fun at the safety slogan posted at railroad crossings and the route directions a tour guide gives to followers. Once Venice dominated the seas, it is from Venice that Marco Polo started his voyages. Dante had been sent to Venice as an ambassador by Guido da Polenta. The city with rich cultural legacy has now been reduced to a mere shadow of its former self by the influx of American culture. The apotheosis of tragedy is reached when the tourist, faced with such kind of architectural wonders, can only say, "Isn't this well carved simply darling?" The ending of the poem suggests how the poet craves separation from this materialistic society. So here comes a sharp criticism of materialistic American civilization, and there is a contrast between the old world Europe and the new world America. Europe, which had culture, which had inheritance, which had sophistication, and America on the other hand has money and only money and is very materialistic and completely devoid of aesthetic senses. So when they go to Venice, they are completely oblivious to the huge cultural legacy of that place. They don't appreciate the exquisite architecture, and for them it is just well carved, simply darling. That is how an American will respond to this situation. And at the end of the poem, the poet craves for separation from this materialistic society because he himself is an American, and thus the criticism of American materialism comes from within. So today we sometimes talk about the crassness of American money, but it was long before us, almost 85 years back, E.E.Cummings was proffering the same criticism of American materialistic culture. In this poem, the poet alludes to Dante's Divine Comedy, Miss Howe's battle hymn of the Republic, to show how the present is at loggerheads with the past. In the phrase, "O education, O the cook and son," the poet alludes to a successful travel firm that orchestrated many tours of the continent. The merging of education with the name of a travel firm shows how the craze for tourism has brought educational downfall. So you see, he is essentially talking about education which enhances one's analytical ability, which trains the mind, and which gives a very liberal Catholic view of the world. On the other hand, there are skills, and there are skills which train people to earn money and more money. So when a travel firm has the name of the travel firm has orchestrated many tours of the continent, is merged is with the name of an educational institution, that clearly points to the degradation of American system of education, where the goal of education is not to build character or to impart training in thinking for oneself, but education simply means a set of skills that will equip people to earn more money. Germany. It's worth noting that the last two lines are within brackets that signifies the poet's separation from the prevalent culture, a typographical experiment so typical of Cummings' craftsmanship. So you have to read the poem, you have to see the poem on print to know that in the last two lines they are within bracket, and in the first reading it may seem that it is idiosyncratic, but actually it is not idiosyncratic. It's a very powerful statement on the part of the poet that though he is an American, he doesn't want to belong to this crass materialistic culture of America, and that is how he has indulged in some kind of a typographical experiment to show that he is outside the purview of this materialistic culture. The next poem is I Sing of Olaf, Glad and Big. The poem is collected from Cummings' anthology W. Cummings had experienced the wartime violence and recorded it vividly in his experimental novel, The Enormous Room. In this poem, he also gives us a snapshot of the ravages of war. As a votary of individualism, Cummings was shocked to see how individual rights were infringed during wartime. Now, you remember from your earlier modules that America is a country which championed the cause of the individual. It's a country which strongly advocated individualism, and if you also remember the English poets of the First World War, how they were conscripted young boys who were sent to these trenches where they died, and the possibility of their genius was never realized, then you know what Cummings actually felt about the ravages of war. It's not only the physical destruction of buildings or people, lots and lots of people were killed, but it was also infringement on individual rights, whereby young boys were killed, their talents were never realized, and the whole national life was regimented beyond, whole national life was regimented, which was totally unacceptable to him. The poem I Sing of Olaf, Glad and Big is about a man who is a strong pacifist and refuses to go to war. A colonel takes him away and tries to convince him to go to war, but he refuses to comply. He is tortured yet still refuses to go to war. He does not resist the torture but takes it, merely accepting what they are putting him through and not doing anything to prevent it. He doesn't fight back physically but fights back by staying true to his beliefs and not giving in to them. Eventually they gave up on him and left him to die, as he would not agree to go to war whatever they put him through. He still refused and stuck by his beliefs. The narrator of the poem finishes by praising him, saying how he is brave and pure. It is indicated that he is braver than those who did go to war to fight for their country, as not only did he endure physical pain, but he went through the emotional trauma of being referred to as a coward and being made to believe that he is letting his country down. He did not die what was seen as a hero's death. He was not after honor. He was merely staying true to what he saw to be right. Now, you know, the rhetoric of warmongering, he strongly criticized this rhetoric of warmongering and how the whole discourse rendered people who were strong enough to advocate peace, rendered them cowards at the whole world, as if the whole world looked at them. They were cowards. They didn't have the courage to go to the war. Now you see, what is courage? To go to war and mindlessly kill people, or to decide to stick to one's belief, come what may, and decide not to kill people mindlessly. So you see, this is a huge discourse which is very relevant today as it was relevant when Cummings wrote this poem. Brackets are used after the Cornell is mentioned in this poem. Trig West pointer most succinctly bred. This is giving us an idea of the social status of the Cornell and implies that he is a rich man. It also, however, likens him to an animal. The term bred is usually used when making reference to animals and not people. I am immediately reminded of the first scene of Shakespeare's King Lear, when the Duke says that, well, his upbringing was at my charge. So look at the animal imagery that he used for his biological son who was conceived and delivered outside wedlock. There is a rhythmic pattern to the poem which makes it flow more, making it more likely to be remembered and easier to read. We have already talked about free verse as part of the experimentation of modernist technique. The poem is split into differently sized sections. It appears as if they are divided into different parts depending on the main topic of the particular section. For example, the part about the president is set out in a section of 4 lines, yet when the topic changes to that of what the narrator hopes to see when he dies, a new section has been formed separate to the part about what the president did to Olaf. So you see, the division was according to the importance of the topic as was conceived by the poet. So if the poet considered that that the topic was important enough, he devoted more lines to it, and if he thought the topic was not important, he just restricted himself to 4 lines. The final line of the poems contains a colon which makes the reader of the poem pause. It almost as if it slows the poem down as it finishes and makes you think more about the meaning of the final line. It makes you think about whether you agree with the narrator or not about his view of Olaf's bravery. So you see, this is again a stylistic experimentation that will provide a cue to the reader. So the colon, which is a kind of pause, so the reader is goaded to pause and think, and probably think over and over again about the validity of the president section, the Cornell section, and Olaf's action, and go all over in his mind about the discourse of warmongering. The next poem is Somewhere I Have Never Travelled Gladly Beyond. The poem is collected from the anthology W. This poem shows Cummings' departure from his social themes such as critiquing the social wrongs. This poem shows the transcendental qualities of Cummings' verse. Cummings believes that ultimate truth cannot be quantified or proved but only perceived by the imagination or intuition. So you see, there is a major break. From social critiquing, he is going over to transcendentalism. The opening stanzas of the poem suggests the intangible nature of love. The poet had never experienced such kind of love before that cannot be felt by touch. His 5 sense organs are ill-equipped to reveal the extent of his love. In the second stanza, the poet turns upside down the prevalent fashion of comparing his beloved to a flower. Instead, Cummings compares himself to a rose and his lover to spring. Just as a flower is germinated, so does the poet rejuvenate by the spring-like warmth of the beloved. I think there is a subtle suggestion of the exchange of gender roles here. The third stanza describes how the poet likes to be directed by the wish of his lover, or if your wish be to close me, I and my life will shut very beautifully. The adverb beautifully suggests that the poet has no complaint against the acts of his lover. The fourth stanza is rich in transcendental metaphors that lend the poem a touch of complexity. The poet tells unequivocally that the experience gathered by the five senses pales into insignificance in comparison to the experience gathered by transcendental love. In the final stanza, the poet writes that all his attempts at describing the exquisite nature of love ultimately prove futile. The nature of transcendental love beggars description. The line, "Only something in me understands the voice of your eyes is deeper than all roses," suggests that the experience of it cannot be depicted but only be felt. And then we move over to the poem "My Father Moved Through Dooms of Love," and this poem has so many things in common with the earlier poem, because here also he talks about his father who adhered to a strict sense of values, who suffered for these and who never deviated from his sense of values, and his father becomes a godlike personality, and the transcendental nature of the last poem continues in this poem also. The poem is collected from Cummings' volume entitled 50 Poems. The poet fuses romantic individualism with social responsibility. Here Cummings sings in praise of his father, who through his philanthropic acts has taught the materialistic world the lesson of charity and love. As the poem opens, the poet describes how his father overcame the odds imposed against him through the power of love. His father, like the touch of April, gave a clarion call to the slumbering world. The subsequent metaphors, such as lifting the valleys of the sea, extended his father's resemblance to God. In his various roles as professor, minister, Edward Cummings tried to resurrect the world. So you see, this is a highly romanticized portrayal of his father. Even in his old age, his father did not deviate from the path of virtue and went on living a pious life that set an example before the future generation. As a human being, his father was subject to physical death, yet the qualities of his father stood for did not die with him. The final line of the poem, "Love is the whole and more than all," validates the poet's philosophy. So we come to the end of this module, and you have been exposed to a very important poet of American literature who has diversified into various kinds of poetry, if I may say so. He has experimented with stylistics, he has experimented with coinage, he has experimented with the shape of the poem, and he has written mainly about social injustices. He has protested against the savagery of the First World War. At the same time, he could come back to transcendentalism, which is a philosophy that preaches love, that preaches peace, and he could write about his ideals in poems, one of which is dedicated to his father. So you can see his range. Thank you.